And welcome back. We begin our first conversation of the morning with our guest who is joining us via Zoom. We have with us the president of the Belize Nurses Association, none other than Darrell Spencer. Good morning, Mr. Spencer.
Good morning, Isaisani. Good morning, Marlene. Good morning, Belize.
Let's begin by painting a picture of the present situation where we are seeing that nurses are resigning from their profession here in Belize to seek their career elsewhere in the world. We're looking at the United Kingdom, for instance. We're looking at the United States and, of course, Canada as the three main markets that they're looking to. Paint for us that picture so that we could get a proper understanding of what's taking place.
First of all, the movement of nurses throughout the world is something that has been happening since people can move around. Mm-hmm. So let's not try to get it twisted that it's something that's happening in the last year or two.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What has been happening though, and I'm glad that you brought that up. First, you mentioned UK, because most people believe that, the nurses are going to the US, and that is not a truth. One of our biggest losers of nurses in Belize is, like you said, the UK and Canada, mm-hmm. where these are Commonwealth countries, and the transition then is easier. Mm-hmm. We lose quite a bit of staff to the UK and Canada. Everybody thinks, the nurse disappeared, so she must be in the US, and that is not true. But being the three biggest takers of our brain from Belize, what happens every year, it gets a little worse. And in my 30 years in nursing in Belize, the past 3, 4, 5 years have been very significant in the movement of nurses away from Belize. And it's because of things that are happening in Belize, obviously.
Yeah. I spoke with a nurse on Friday, and it was sort of like an eye-opener to understand the way how things work in terms of them being able to renew their work permits on a annual or on a particular basis. And one of the things that stood out to me was the price point, if I can use that description, where in 1 year they are paying X amount, but to renew it the following time, it's almost like triple the same amount. And I could understand that in a pandemic situation where we were looking at salary cuts and all these other things, that there would be a higher cost to be able to renew a work permit. Has anyone within the association or elsewhere shared this experience with you?
All right, so the question here is, why should it be more expensive during the pandemic? Mm-hmm. That doesn't make much financial sense. When you have something like a pandemic coming around, then it is the sensible thing of the government to see how they can make life a little easier. If you raise it during the pandemic, you make it worse, because then the person already is a little bit cash strapped, mm-hmm. and you're going to increase these fees for persons that you need to help you during the pandemic. So raising it at this point in time is totally ridiculous. Mm-hmm. This is not the point in time. When you are going to raise a fee is when you have enough personnel, or you have a flood of the market. So you're going to raise fee to try to control the amount of persons, to try to decrease the amount of persons eligible to come, who would want to come. But we are short. So to raise it at this point in time is counterproductive.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, the raise in the work permit charge was up last year. Why is it now becoming, they raised it last year to $3,000. Why is it becoming an issue this year?
All right, that question is very valid, and it's twofold. There's a part of the discussion that isn't being mentioned, and it goes by the Nurses Council. Mm-hmm. And rightfully so, the Nurses Council have stepped up on the continued issuance and renewals of temporary license in the country. Mm-hmm. This is a professional step, and this is not something that started because of COVID. This is something that we started from 2019.
Yeah.
The staff were informed that, like the laws of Belize say, if you are going to be on the register in the Nurses Council, you must come to Belize. If you do not come from a country that shares reciprocity with our council, with our country, then you must sit and pass your license exam. That is not something that Daryl Spencer is saying, or any of the nurses are saying. That is the legal aspect of what's happening. So most of these persons that are leaving are persons who are not eligible for a renewal of their temporary permits. So they must, by the end of this year, sit and pass their regional nursing exam, the RENR that we call it. And so if these persons figure that they do not want to or they cannot pass the exam, then this is a part of the reason behind why they are moving on.
But they would have been working without having taken this exam before.
Yes, and that is the problem.
Yeah.
Because then you have a duly completed Belize nurse, and that Belizean nurse is not privy to a temporary permit to work until he or she passes their exam. So it is just fair to everybody.
Yeah.
Again, you can put it to any license in any part of the world about anything.
Yeah.
If you have a group of persons that just comes in and does the job without having to sit any kind of qualifying examination to get a proper license, then those persons would basically flood the market, and your persons who are qualified trying to get a job won't have one.
But let's paint the correct picture here, because the World Health Organization has flagged many years ago the issue of the nursing shortage. People grow up, they have an interest in medicine, and that naturally puts them on the path of medical school to become a doctor versus a nurse. And so across the world, there are not enough nurses in the healthcare system. Wealthier countries like the United Kingdom, Canada, they have more attractive packages that any nurse in any part of the world would be attracted to go and work in that area. When you did your interview last week, you said that you felt if there were more jobs available in Belize, that we would keep our Belizean nurses. But is that true, Mr. Spencer? And while we acknowledge, one, that you're a specialized nurse, I don't want to miss that fact, which is already a small group in the country, and two, you and your colleagues have decided to dedicate decades in this country, not everyone has that inclination, especially if there's a better offer somewhere else.
And I agree. All right, so I am trying to say now, while I agree with that some persons would want to come out and go to greener pastures, as we preferably put it, there are hundreds of Belizean educated in Belize that left because it's just getting too ridiculous to be here. You have quite a few, we have, to put it in perspective, in today's money, we have, I'd say, 50 or 75 nurses who have changed their mind just in the last month that this thing is not going to be practical for me to see. And they are young nurses who have a job and they want to stay. We have some Belizeans, look, hats off to the hundreds of Belizean nurses who have continued to give service to this country with all the deplorable conditions. And that is a big body of nurses.
Yeah.
And there is also another, out of every group, you might have, 20 or 35% that might stay in Belize. But we as a country, we are making it, our government is making it impossible for them to even take that option. And that is where I want the discussion to be. Why can't we discuss how to keep the few that we that want to stay?
Yeah.
And if if you're going to get a job today and in the news industry, your CEO and your boss makes it impossible and put up a lot of ridiculous rules and change the fees, you are already qualified to go anywhere. So then the option of leaving becomes more practical, more obvious.
When I look at what transpired last week, for instance, where you have 5 nurses from the COVID unit itself who have tendered their resignation, I look at the fact that we are in a pandemic situation and COVID isn't going anywhere anytime soon, despite the ongoing campaign to vaccinate. But the point that I'm making is we can't afford to be losing nurses at a time like this where in one particular unit alone, 5 persons are leaving.
Yes. So ask yourself the question. Let's all ask ourselves the question. Why is it that the Minister of Health, why is it that the government of Belize failed to listen to the nurses? So the onus is being thrown on the shoulders of the nurses. But the nurses, look, nobody studies in their country, nobody gets qualified in their country to go to another country to work. How many people do that? From the time that these persons have invested time, money, energy in studying Belize, it's because they want to stay. Their first inclination is to stay, but the government constantly makes it impossible for them to stay. When I touch on that part with the amount of posts available to nurses, what are the chances of a nurse staying in Belize waiting for the government to create a post for him or her? It doesn't make any sense. So you have nurses working, again, little contracts here and there. They work private a couple of months. They have to work 2 jobs. They work some sessions with the government because they cannot be hired because the government from years immemorial have insisted to not increase the amount of posts available. That is a fact. And that doesn't make any sense because if I didn't have a committed job in Belize, I'd be gone too.
Yeah.
So how can you ask me to please stay in Belize and then you're going to further ask me to stay and wait until I decide to create a post for you so you can be gainfully employed?
Daryl, you know, if there's a silver lining to all that's happening, and I know it's hard to imagine, but the conversation is happening. And I'm glad that you point out that this is not a today issue. This has been a long time issue that now is reaching a crisis point where nurses who came to Belize for work are leaving and now leaving us in an even greater shortage. Tell me about the situation on the ground at the moment. We already knew that nurses who are employed, especially in the public sector, I don't know as much in the private sector, were already working longer hours than an average nurse should. That they had, in fact, the number of nurses that we do have, they aren't enough to serve. And also, we don't have sufficient specialized nurses, and even the registered nurses aren't enough, so more practical nurses are doing the work of the registered nurse.
That is true, and all that you said is completely true. I want to clarify one thing for you that you said, and it's a good question. When you look at a private institution in Belize, most of our private institutions are smaller in bed capacity. So you have 2 or 3 nurses working, let's say, in healthcare partners, and their bed capacity is 20. You have 2 or 3 nurses working in the public sector, and the bed capacity is 30. And so that is a big disparity where it comes here. We cannot force the private sector to mirror what's happening in the public sector. Yeah. But what we need to do is to encourage the government to realize that, look, for the amount of beds, the amount of patients, the classification of patients that you have nurses tending to, 2021 is not the time to have one nurse tending to 13 or 14 or 15 patients, which quite often happens. So the nurses on the ground in the public sector are becoming more burnt out, and they do not get that support from their supervisor nor from their ministry. And that is a big factor that is being thrown now, that nurses are just giving up. And people are saying, oh, the nurses are very selfish and they are very, look.
But help us understand though, the shortage that has existed, what's the amount of work that the nurses are doing now versus what they're supposed to be doing? Because you talk about patient to nurse ratio, and that's a key part of this.
Yes, and like I'm trying to say that the amount of work has always existed. However, like I congratulated the Belizean nurses who have stayed all these years. And I'm still support of those that left, because people have to do what they have to do for themselves and their families. The workload has not really increased, but the longer you take 5 pounds on your shoulder, the heavier that 5 pounds become. And that is the thing where it's culminating now into a frustration of that is being manifested by resignation and just giving up. Yeah. And that again adds to the cries from the nurse, because now you're tired, you're frustrated. COVID came around and we had to stretch over to 2 more departments when it comes to infectious cases and the COVID unit. The same amount of nurses were stretched a little more thin. So all of these things have been accumulating on the shoulders of the poor nurses in this country.
How easy is it? Sorry. So let's think of the graduating class of UB, and you have 2 levels. You have the associate level nurses that may be coming out, and now the bachelor's level. How easy is it for them to get a job? So the competitors are public healthcare, private healthcare, and international work.
How easy?
Yeah.
Easy is a word that shouldn't even be in that sentence. Because I tell you what, it is nowhere near easy. And this is what I'm saying. When you come out from UB, look at the class that is graduating from UB today. Let's say there are 40 of them. And let's say 40 of them sit and pass their license exam, or sat and pass, because the exam was earlier in this year. There is no jobs for them in the public sector. The need is there. Mind you, I'm not saying the need is not there. But they cannot be hired because the public service has done 2 things. One, they have said that they are not going to continue with all the contracts. And that was the only facility by which these nurses would have been hired, because the government does not have available posts for established positions. And again, so these 2 things, they are fighting against that nurse's decision to stay in the country. By the time that nurse gets a little contract somewhere, the nurse has already moved out of Belize.
So because I can't access work in the public health system, I could go...
Private. Private sector is saturated.
Okay.
I don't know of any private institution who wants to find 5 nurses and can't find. The privates, they have already established more or less the amount of nurses they want to man their unit. So our private system in Belize is saturated. They have what they want. The problem is in the public system, that in a private institution, the board gets together and in 2 days they have a nurse. If they find a nurse and they want a nurse. It is different in the public system, where you have months, nurses who have applied for months, nurses who have applied for years in the public system, and the simple fact that there is not an available post make them frustrate and go away.
Let me ask you this, Darrell. What is the effect of this kind of an exodus, if I could use that term, on the competence of other nurses who are coming behind, who are either on their studies or training with some of the established ones that are now leaving? What is the effect of that? That's a brain drain. And I will answer that in a little analogy.
There was a story sometimes in India where the elephants began to kill the people that were uttering them around through getting the jobs done. You know, in those places they use elephants to get a lot of the hard labor done. And when they studied the whole thing, what was the problem was that because they had gotten away with all of the older bull elephants, so there was nobody left to teach the younger elephants coming up that they are not supposed to be killing the people.
Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
And that is what's happening in Belize. If you are coming out green from school and there is no way for a senior person to mentor, there's no mentorship because all the seniors are going. Right now, there is a big gap in nursing where all those persons in the middle that would have brought and transcended that experience up to the higher levels, they have disappeared. Those are the persons that went to the States 10, 15, 20 years ago. So people like myself are limited to now pass down knowledge to the juniors. What will happen? That is a question of serious.
So where are the mid-career nurses? You're saying those are the ones that are away, or they're also in private sector? Have they retired early or not pursuing nursing? Where are they?
They have gone to the private sector because the private sector wanted experienced persons. Because if you have 2 experienced nurses, those 2 experienced nurses can do you more proper patient care than if you have 3 or 4 juniors. So they have moved to the private sector. They have moved out of Belize. Some of them, some of us have stayed, but a very small amount.
Daryl, do you want to bring some clarity to the situation? Because one of the things when we hear your concerns, it sounds or it would appear to people that you are opposed to foreign nurses working in the country.
No. I don't. I will clear up that concern.
Yes.
I have no problem with anybody working in any country because let's be fair. If I have a problem with foreign nurses coming to Belize, then I should have a problem with my Belizean nurses leaving. And people have to go and find a job where they can. I have no opposition to that. What I have opposition to is when you're going to treat the Belizean nurse, homegrown, home-trained, wants to stay home, you're going to treat them as lesser people. When it comes to what you're offering, that is my problem. I think if you want to allow foreigners to come in, the least you should do is to have the playing field equal.
Okay, stick up in there for a second and let me ask you this then. So we're looking at several scenarios. We have Nigerian doctors and nurses, we have the Filipinos, and we have the Cubans. What is the difference in terms of their arrangement versus the homegrown as you're speaking?
All right. So the minister mentioned some programs. And I'm talking about programs like the TAC program that was established years ago by another administration with Nigeria, and it has been established with Cuba, and not much so the Filipinos, because when the Filipinos came first, yes, they were on that program. But after that, shortly after, I think the Filipino program only lasted a couple of years, 2 or 3 years. But the other people, a Cuban comes on a delegation from their country, an arrangement made with the country and country of Belize. A Nigerian, we had some of those also. When we look at all that is given to these staff, I would want to be on that program. Because if somebody comes to me and tells me, Mr. Spencer, you are going to be in Belize, I am going to pay your rent, I am going to pay your light, I am going to pay your water, I am going to take you to and from work. Basically, I have no more bills. And I am going to give you $1,500 a month. Isani, Marlene, I do not take home $1,500 of a month from my salary after I've paid all these bills. So this is something that I'm not trying to say, excuse me, that I want them to decrease the emoluments for those persons, because I think those are rightfully due. But the cost of living for the Belizean nurse is exceedingly high compared to what they are making, and that is what we want to clarify.
Yeah.
Look, it is too hard. When I finish paying all of my bills, if I have $200 or $300 of my salary to put in a savings, I'm good. That is a good month. And for a professional who have been working for 30 years in this country, I think for me not to be able to do that is pitiful, is disheartening. So these programs their arrangement that were made to subsidize the nursing and doctors numbers in the country, and at that, when they were started, they were, to me, that was the thing to have been done. But meanwhile, we could have been making more allowances available for more facilities. I hate to use the word allowances, but more facilities for an easier transition and an easier life for the nurses from Belize, so that we could have now been carrying our own country's nursing problems.
It's a tough spot, though. I mean, if you look at it from the outside, where Belize needs to attract the professionals, the nurses from other countries. Even if we add on the recent graduates, as you noted, to get experienced persons to kind of fill the gap within the hospitals, you still need to attract foreign nurses. And we're competing with with countries that can offer a lot more. And make no mistake, for the Belizean nurses to say as well, it's the same competition. From the Nurses Association standpoint, what is your proposed solution, short term, because now we're facing a crisis in the shortage, medium term and long term?
All right, you'll notice I'm going to shake my head just now.
I can't see, but tell me why.
So, I will tell you why. Because every year goes by, and then we come the next year and discuss a short term. This is a long-standing problem.
Yes.
So if we had solved it every year that had gone by so far, we would not be in this position today. And if we continue kicking the pan down the road, we will be in this same thing, discussing another short-term fix in 5 years. And that is the problem. When do we as a country come together and decide, look, this thing needs to be solved and we have to start solving it today? To create another short-term, I would agree that today we need a short-term fix.
Yeah.
And that is just common sense. But what do we do? In the meantime, we could have already initiated a discussion, and that is where our minister has failed us, or government has failed us. And I'm not blaming Mr. Shebat. I am blaming Mr. Shebat. I am blaming Mr. Marin. I am blaming Mr. Koyi and all of the ministers of health that have been. Because everybody comes to the room and kicks the pan down the road. What we need to do is to not only attract, because if you just attract, easier if you find a boyfriend or a girlfriend. But every year you have to change them because you got no commitment, you got no retention program. And that is the problem facing this country. And it has been facing this country since 1991 when I started. When are we going to stop kicking the pan down the road? I think today should be the perfect day to start.
Yeah. And that's why I said, if there's a silver lining to the situation, is that this conversation is happening and it's happening publicly. So you understand that there is a short-term solution that needs to be found, but what you're saying is You want the conversation to get serious about how we address the root of the problem. What do you think would help in keeping nurses in Belize? All the Belizean trained nurses who came up through UB, or even those who are away, maybe to come back. What do you think it would take?
All right. So an address was made, I think it was in 2012, 2014, thereabout, by Dr. Parks. She had already has now resigned and retired, sorry, and moved on. And in that discussion, what started, they realized that a nurse with a bachelor's got way less than anybody else with a bachelor's in this country.
Wow.
These are the things that need to be addressed. A registered nurse in their professional status makes way less than other professionals. They make less than some of the non-professionals in this country. And those are the things that need to be addressed. I'm 100% sure that Belize as a country cannot compete solely on salaries. That is a fact. I mean, I don't see where, and I think it is stupid for a nurse in Belize who wants to stay in Belize to say, you know what, I want to be making 40 or 50 US dollars an hour, because that not happen, and only that will make I stay. But Marlene and Mr. Caetano, you could make their salaries competitive, at least in the Belizean market. You can not refuse to give the nurse or the doctor or the attendant that are on shift a sensible cup of coffee or tea, if possible, man. You can afford to, this person is not going home for a lunch. Give them a sensible meal. How much it is to provide a sensible meal for somebody? If I cook home, I know a meal costs me less than $5. So things like these, give the people them the materials they need. Do you know how many times it frustrates us that you're trying to treat your patient and the medications that you need are not available? The materials that you need are not available. The equipment that you need to get the job done right are not available. And we keep seeing the ministries and the government wasting millions and millions of dollars on idle things, and then they say that, oh, your health is important. You're not acting as if though the health of the nation is important. You're acting as if though the streets are important. You're acting as if though the buildings are important. You're acting as though the comfort of your CEOs and the ministers are important. Your actions say that those are the things that you address as important. And the real things that are important, the education and the health of your nation, you neglect.
All right. And just, so we can ensure that this is something that we recognize, when we talk about nursing shortage, this has a direct impact in quality of care.
Of course.
Whether or not there are sufficient nurses is one thing, but if nurses are working very long hours, the likelihood or the probability of human error becomes higher.
Yes and no. I will say yes because the studies have shown that yes, we need a break or you burn out. That we need 2 or 3 or 4 days a week to rest, that's another discussion. And in other countries, nurses have been allowed to work 2 jobs to make it. In Belize, we cannot do that because, again, the government came in and they cut the overtime. So now I cannot even extend my rested hours in trying to subsidize an already small salary. So that is a big discussion again. And
one last question on that, because we know that there's a reduced hour for public servants, and as a nurse that works in the public sector, you can explain that for me. So with 5 hours less, I know there's a question about overtime that you need clarity on. Do you want to explain that one?
So let me ask you from like a maths standpoint. Let's not look at the nurses shortage. Mathematically, You're paying me $1,000 a month for 40 hours a week. We needed to do overtime at that point in time to cover the department. So 40 hours, you actually needed 60 boot hours per nurse last year, right? You come to the table and you say, you know what, I need to cut salaries. So you cut their salaries, which that is the onus of they can do that if they want, obviously. And then now, to compensate for lost wages, you propose that you're going to cut 5 hours from the work week, which again, that is good. I support that. If you cut salaries and you can compensate with less hours, you're basically making the same wage per hour as a personnel. But what does that do to the department that is short already? Your overtime now will begin from 35 hours. So for those same 20 hours a month that you used to pay me, let's say $10 an hour, you are going to pick that up as an establishment as overtime now and pay me for time and a half for those 20 hours. How is that sensible?
Yeah, valid point.
So from a mathematical standpoint, the government is working against itself.
There clearly needed to be, or I would say from hearing what you're saying, there needs to be some specialized attention as to what is going to happen specifically with healthcare workers and the nurses as well.
And pardon Marlene, but I don't think that should happen because we are public officers and we cannot encourage that discussion to how, oh, sometimes you will be treated like public officers and sometimes you won't. The government needs to make up its mind. Are we going to be treated as public officers or are you going to continue to abuse us under the disguise of essential services? Because we have been abused from the public service under that disguise for years. In other little ways.
Has the Nurses Association reached out to the ministry to be a part of the conversation on the solution?
I'll tell you like this. Since November of last year, after the election, we have tried to reach out to the Ministry of Health, and they have refused any conversation with us.
As the Nurses Association?
As the Nurses Association.
Okay.
We have gotten calls from a contact of the minister, like I think a month and a half ago. And it is disgraceful to say that I got that call like almost 5 o'clock or around 6 o'clock Friday evening. And we felt insulted as an association that you will call us Friday evening, Friday night, the close of the work week, to want a meeting Saturday morning, when we have been asking for a meeting with you for months. It's like.
But the Deputy Director of Health Service is the head nurse.
Yes, she is.
Yeah. And have you communicated or liaised with her?
Well, from the association standpoint, we have communicated with her on the grounds that we both share seat on the Nurses Council. Okay. But as a meeting between the ministry and the association, we haven't had that meeting. We are still waiting for that meeting because, like I was saying, even at that time when they had asked for us to meet with them on Saturday, which our executive is all over the country. So, and we can't afford to tell the nurse, you know what, you don't plan your weekend. But the minister needs to speak to us, so we are going to fly you from wherever point to wherever point this meeting will be had. All right. We offered them to, look, this is not sensible. We cannot meet with you on such short notice as a complete executive even. So we put it to them, you know, we can see you anytime after 10 o'clock Monday morning. That would have been in 2 or 3 days. And
All right.
up to today, the ministry has not responded to accept that meeting. So did they really want a meeting, or they just wanted to make a proposition so that when the discussion comes up, they can say, oh, we reached out to the association and they refused.
All right.
Because since then, the minister or any of his personnel have failed to communicate with the association by phone call, by email, by oral letter through the service of the government of Belize. None of that. What does that tell me? That tells me that they don't respect us as even staff.
Well, we do hope that there is the possibility for that meeting to take place, and we appreciate you shedding light from the nurses' point of view and the association's point of view about the current situation, and definitely about looking at the long-term solutions to this issue. Thank you very much, Daryl, and continue to stay safe.
Thank you guys for having us as the association.
All right.
Enjoy your day.
You're welcome.
All right. And with that, we're going to go ahead and take a break. And when we come back, we'll be breaking down the salary cuts for teachers. So please stay tuned.